Hey everybody, welcome back to I'm Not the Book Expert, but She Is. Rachel and I are here. This is actually a continuation of our last episode. We were originally planning to spend a single episode talking about our year in books on Goodreads, and then added to that our top 10 books from 2021. And then we ended up talking about it all for about 2.5 hours. So we decided to split things up kind of last minute. If you missed our last episode where we talked about our Goodreads year in review, you can go back and check that one out and then come back here as we begin to talk about our top 10 books from 2021. Enjoy! So we both made a list of our top 10. We're going to go through them like from 10 down to 1, which to like our number 1 book of the year.
Mm-hmm.
But we also have some honorable mentions that we'll get to in a minute. So I'm going to make Rachel go first with her number 10 and we'll alternate back and forth.
And some of us have, well, us, there's 2 of us, but some of these books are repeated on our lists. So whoever has it higher up on their list is when we're going to talk about it.
Yeah.
Is that accurate?
Yeah. It'll be fine. You'll figure it out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So Rachel, tell me your number 10.
My number 10 was a book called Ghostwood Song by Erica Waters. It was originally published in 2020. I listened to it and pretty much cried through the entire book. The main character is a fiddler, and her dad was also a fiddler. And it takes place in Florida. She's part of a bluegrass band. She is part of the LGBTQ plus community, as is some of the other characters in the book, or as are some of the other characters in the book. And it's all about her coming to age, but also finding her dad's fiddle, which can raise the dead. So she can bring ghosts back. And it's kind of this battle between obsession, but then also wanting to get closer to her father and figuring out where that balance lies, because her father has passed away.
Gotcha.
When I say I cried for the entire book, that is not an exaggeration. But I also really, really loved it. So I want to get the actual physical book because I listened to it in an audiobook form. But if you want like dark countryside as a vibe, this would be it.
Gotcha. Almost like, I don't want to call it Southern necessarily, because I don't think Southern when I think of Florida necessarily, but almost sort of like a Southern Gothic kind of vibe.
Yeah, it's so it does take place in like the more traditionally southern side of Florida.
Okay.
I think one of the characters is even from Texas and like moved to Florida.
Why would you move to Florida?
I don't know.
Okay,
it's too hot there. Like I'm not a hot person. Ugh.
I think you're very hot, Rachel.
Oh, well, thank you, Maggie. But I, again, really, really liked it. It is one of my favorite reads from the year. Obviously, I ranked it at number 10. So
would you say, just because you read it as an audiobook, and it sounds like music has a lot to do with this book, would you say that your experience was maybe improved by hearing it as an audiobook? Not that there was like music in the audiobook necessarily, but like...
So there actually was music in the audiobook from what I remember. But again, I listened to this in September, so it's a little bit of a ways away.
Basically 30 years ago.
Right. It was the beginning of the school year. Don't ask me questions about anything that has happened between now and September, because who knows if I'm going to remember them. I did get COVID in that time period too, so like...
She's fine now.
I am fine now, but like memory, non-existent. But from what I remember, they actually did play some bluegrass music while reading the audiobook. So you could hear kind of what the vibe would have been, and it was really cool.
Huh. I really like that. I like it when audiobooks do more than just read the book, if that makes sense.
And they put life into it.
Yeah. I know, like, I read a lot of the books that I've read by Maggie Stiefvater, I've actually listened to as audiobooks, which I didn't really intend to do, but as it turns out, she actually has composed some music to include with her audiobooks, either as like an introduction or as like a closing piece as the book ends. I think it's very interesting.
I love that.
But yeah, my number 10 book was What We Devour by Linsey Miller, which is actually on Rachel's list at number 2, I think.
Yes, number 2 for me.
So we can talk more about it later. I'll just say, it was a weird book, but not in a bad way. I think most of the time I was like, Rachel, what is going on? I don't understand, but I kept reading. So like,
okay, and that's what I told you. I was like, you just have to keep going. Like, you will understand. Just keep going.
Yeah. I try not to DNF books unless I'm just really not feeling it. So like, I did DNF a lot of books this year just because I was like, I don't have the time or the patience for it. But What We Devour kept my attention really well. And I was just very intrigued, even if I was like confused. It was a good confusion.
Confusion.
Yeah. What was your number 9?
My number 9 was Ugly Love by Colleen Hoover. It's been out for a while. It came out in 2014. I just whacked my microphone, sorry.
How dare
but
you?
I know. This was another audiobook I was listening to, and I hated every single second of it in the beginning, which I realize sounds so weird that it's number 9. But I ended up in the end really loving the book. I felt like it dealt with a lot of really hard-hitting topics, and it very much had this hopeful message of encouragement while still being like, it's okay to still hurt. And I thought that was really important because it is a romance novel, and it's not happy-go-lucky the entire time. And it's not they're instantly head over heels and everything's going great, and then there's this miscommunication and then everything goes downhill, but in the end they end up together. Like, that's not what happens. And I very much appreciated that.
It sounds like it felt very real to you, like very realistic.
Indeed.
And not just like the happy fluffy romance, which sometimes you do need. Not that I typically read romance, but there's a time and a place for both. But it sounds like this was where this one's strengths were that it was not afraid to deal with real life.
Correct.
I really like that. Not that I'm going to read
too.
it. I'm probably not going to read it. No offense. Just not.
I'm not at all offended. I didn't recommend it to you. In fact, I told you, Maggie, I do not recommend this book for you.
I think your words were more exactly, I don't think you would like this book. And I said, yeah, I probably wouldn't. And we left it at that.
So that's Rachel, usually when I have permission to spoil it for her.
Yeah. Did I tell you? Sorry, this is a total tangent. The new Spider-Man movie that came out recently.
If you say any spoilers about it, I will lose my mind.
I was not going to spoil it. I was just saying I got spoiled for it. To be fair, I saw the thing that said spoilers for No Way Home, and I still looked at it, but see, here's
okay, that was your own decision.
That was my own decision, but I'm not like upset about it. I also just am kind of ambivalent about the Marvel universe right now. I still would like to go see Spider-Man, but I also don't want to get the plague, so I might just kind of sit this one out for a little while.
Yeah, I understand that.
Yeah, sorry, we were talking about spoilers and I wanted to tell you that, and so now it's going to be on the podcast, I guess. So my number 9 book was Howl's Moving Castle by Diana Wynne Jones. If that title sounds familiar to you, you might know the Studio Ghibli film from whenever that was. I saw that many years ago. Don't remember a single thing that happened in it, other than that it's basically nothing like the book that it's based on. But not in a bad way. I think both are good pieces of media. They're just very different in the stories that they tell. Because from what I remember of the film, they try to cast like the one main character, Howl, as like this like cool, mysterious, like magical guy. And in the book, he's just a human disaster. And I think that's great.
I feel like most of us are just human disasters.
Mm-hmm. What did I write in my notes? I said, he's a disaster man and I love him. Except also I kind of wanted to slap him a couple times. Sophie is my favorite character though, because she just gets like cursed by this witch to like appear old, and she's just like, well, guess this is my life now, and runs away from home. And I was like, I respect that. If somebody walked up to me and was like, you're gonna be old now, I'd be like, yeah, that seems about right.
I would be like, oh, my outside finally matches my inside. Let's go.
A couple people at work have told me, like, oh, Maggie, you're just an old soul. And I'm like, great, that just means I've lost all my serotonin already by the ripe old age of 23. I haven't said that back to them. I've just been like, oh, thanks.
I've been called an old soul since I was 2 years old. So, like, I'm not joking either. I am not joking.
That seems about right. Yeah, I think Howl's Moving Castle probably is the oldest book on either of our lists, because I was looking up the publication date for something else the other day. It's like published in 1986, I think.
That seems right.
Which is not that old, but also it was like 40 years ago. Almost 40 years ago. Terrifying thought. Don't like that.
I feel old. Thank you.
I also feel old. We were both born in the 90s, in case you didn't
We
know
were
that.
both born in the 90s, but my parents graduated in the 80s. So, like, yeah, that just feels weird.
Yeah. I think if you like the Studio Ghibli, like Howl's Moving Castle film, I think you would also like this book, even though it is different.
Mm-hmm.
It has the same vibes, but it tells a different story, I think.
I got you.
Digress. What was your number 8?
My number 8 technically is a series. I want to clarify that we were allowed to include series on our list if they were the same storyline.
Yeah. Like, I said we should group series together because like say like 3 of my 5-star books of the year were like all part of a series, and I just felt like, oh, those would be like my numbers like 2, 3, and 4. Like,
yeah, and it covered the same story
line.
Yeah, exactly. So my number 8 was the series Dorothy Must Die, specifically the first one being my favorite, which is Dorothy Must Die, and it follows the story of Oz after Dorothy leaves. And to provide a little bit more context for people who maybe aren't as versed in Ozian lore,
I shouldn't laugh.
That's what it's called.
I'm not laughing at you. I'm just like, because I know you love the Wizard of Oz and all.
I love the
everything.
Wizard of Oz.
I just like you sounded very much like that. For those of you who don't know,
well, it's not a common thing for people to be versed in.
No, I got you. Like,
I'm not trying to be. Yeah, I'm not trying to be pretentious. Most people have just seen the movie or like seen Wicked or listened to Wicked. Like, it is a common enough phenomenon to know the beginning, but not the rest of it.
Right.
So The Wizard of Oz is book 1 in a 14-book series. Yeah, that's what most people don't know.
I actually did not know that.
Yeah, so we'll go on a tangent later. Eventually, I want you to read at least the first book because I love The Wizard of Oz. Okay. But this takes place after Dorothy has left and come back. So Dorothy does come back to Oz. And in this case, Dorothy has kind of become a dictator. And this girl, the main character, is flown in from Kansas on a tornado in her trailer home. And everybody thinks that it is her job to kill Dorothy and like restore Oz to its former glory. So it's all about her journey from like self-hatred to fulfilling what everybody thinks is her end goal and what eventually is her end goal. But I'm not going to tell you what the end goal ends up being. Mm-hmm. But because I love The Wizard of Oz so much, I was really excited for these books. And I started reading it. And I remember messaging Maggie and I was like, I hate it. I hate it. I hate it. I don't know what to do. I hate it. And I kept reading. And then by the end of the first book, I was like, I need all of them. I actually already had all of them, but I like needed to finish them as soon as I could. So I read them all in like a week span. It's only 4 books and they're relatively short, but still loved them.
I'm glad. I don't really have anything else to say about that because I am not
That's fine.
In the lore.
What was your book 8, Maggie?
My book 8. Oh, look, I'm shocked. It was another book that Rachel recommended to me. I don't know what's
so far. So far of the 3 books, 2 of them have been my recommendations to you.
I don't know what this says about me other than that, like, I'm just a predictable person or something. Either it means I'm just super predictable, which is entirely possible and probably true, or Rachel just knows me really well, which is also probably true. At least I hope. Maybe not.
Or it could be both.
Or it could be both. Both is good. Anyway, my number 8 was For the Wolf by Hannah Witten. Whiten?
Yes.
Witten?
I think it's Witten.
Witten. I think it's Witten. I'm gonna go with Witten. So I literally just finished this yesterday because I needed like one more book. I just wanted to read a book and I was like, this book is here.
And I've been pestering her to read it for like 4 months now.
Probably. It's also on Rachel's list, so we can talk more about it later. But I wrote a note to myself and it just says, I simply cannot believe Rachel tricked me into liking a Beauty and the Beast retelling disguised as Little Red Riding Hood. That's all I wrote.
You're welcome.
I'm sure I'll have more to say about it in a couple minutes here. You know. Yeah, that was my number 8. Very good, though. I do definitely recommend it. I wasn't sure how I was going to feel about some parts of it, but I ended up really enjoying it. So, Rachel, what was your number 7?
My number 7 was The Cruel Prince and by Holly Black. I realized that a lot of my books are popular books, or they have been popular books.
I noticed that too. Not that
I don't
criticizing.
Right. And I feel like a lot of people are going to be like, oh, she only reads popular books. And no, first of all, these are my top 10 out of the 70 odd books I read. Yeah. So I just really liked them. These books are popular for a reason, right?
I think, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, I think, because a lot of these are books that were popular a couple years ago, if that makes sense, like when we were still in college or when we were in high school. And just skimming your list, and again, you can correct me if I'm wrong, it feels kind of like almost like you were catching up on sort of what is popular in this genre, because we sort of
that's exactly what I was going to say.
Whereas like I felt like I followed most of it, and a lot of times like I didn't read The Cruel Prince just because I was like, I don't think I'll like this, and that's just a very much a me choice. But like I also read, like in 2020 I read all of the Raven Boys in like a month, because all of the Raven Boys or the Raven Cycle books in a month, because I'd never read them before, and those were mostly popular like when I was like in my earlier college years or when I was in high school. So like, you know, that might be popular, but it's just, you know, we're catching up. We're getting there.
I was actually going to say that I felt like I was catching up. However, my number 1 is still not a popular book. So like,
and it's baloney, but we'll talk about that.
But my number 7 was the Cruel Prince series, specifically the Queen of Nothing. Jude is one of my favorite characters of all time. I love her. She is very much like a Maggie, I'm gonna swear, but I think it makes sense in context. She's very much like a badass woman. I know. Is your little heart gonna?
Rachel.
I know.
I might need a minute to recover.
Okay, well, take your minute. I will continue just talking about my praise for Jude. She was one of the first, like, definitively strong female characters I read this year. Because this was back in April when I averaged my 5 books a week. And I loved her. And my sister read the books, and then we convinced my cousin to read the books. Yeah, so my cousin, my sister, and I, we all kind of have an unofficial book club where we just share all the books we've been reading and then make other people read them. And it is delightful. But this was one of those books that it was like, hey, you need to read this. Hey, you need to read this. Hey, you need to read this. And then they did.
From the very little that I know about the Cruel Prince books, I think I would really like Jude, but I also just don't think I would like the books.
I feel that. I do want to pull like select passages for you to read, but I need to get my hands on the copy, like a copy of the book again, because I don't actually own it.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
I
So what
don't know.
was
I don't have anything against it. It's just like
Yeah.
I've looked at it a couple times, like, there's other things I'd rather read.
I don't think it really matches your vibe, but I do think that there would be parts of it that you would appreciate.
Okay, I can live with that. So, not to steal the spotlight, but my number 7 was, and someone will have to forgive me if I say this wrong, because the name of the book is the name of the main character, and she explains how it's pronounced in the book, but it's been so long since I've read it. So I think it's Elatsoe, by Darcie Little Badger, who also just published a book called A Snake Falls to Earth, which I really want to read soon because she's becoming one of my new favorite authors. But anyway, what did I write about this book? Oh, I wrote ghost dogs. So the main character, she is basically, I'm trying to remember because it has been a while since I read it. I think it's that she's able to see ghosts, or she's able to interact with them in some way. Point being, she has a ghost dog, very important, but it's sort of like a magical, I don't necessarily want to call it magical realism because that has certain specific connotations to it as a genre.
Yeah.
But it is sort of like it's very much set in like the modern day United States, but with magic. Like she has a friend who has some connection to like fae magic. It's very interesting. There's vampires and werewolves and all kinds of fun things.
I think it's a broad genre. Technically, it just fits under the supernatural.
Yeah. So it's like, but it's also like I think it's her cousin sort of has this mysterious accident and dies, and she hears from his like ghost or spirit, and it's like, hey, I was murdered by this person. And so the story is her trying to prove that this person killed her cousin. It was just very good.
Got it.
And I really, really liked the main character. And I also like books that include dogs, or any sort of friendly animal creature.
Legit.
And it felt, in some ways, it felt more like a middle grade book than a young adult book, even though the characters are like 16 and 17 or so. But it's sort of, I would not say that the stakes in the book were very high, but at the same time, it was also just really nice to read a book where you knew who the bad guys were and they got what was coming to them.
Got it. Yeah.
I don't know. There was not a lot of like, oh, the villain is morally gray, and so it was like, no, he's just an awful person, and he got what was coming to him. And it was like, you know what, that was really nice to read about, because real life isn't like that these days or ever.
Indeed. Ugh.
Sometimes my escapism is just like people get what they deserve, which, probably says something about me, but whatever. So that was my number 7.
But honestly, yes, that feels so nice.
Yeah. Rachel, tell me about what your number 6 book was.
My number 6 is the Red Queen series, specifically the Red Queen being my favorite. It's Victoria Aveyard. First of all, love her TikTok. I think she's hilarious. But originally the books were published in 2015. So again, when I was in college and I read them in April 2021, I got the first book and just thought, I'll read this over spring break. It'll be fine. I got a bunch of first books to read over my spring break. And
that's right, I remember that.
That was a mistake, because as soon as I finished it, I was like, excuse me? What? So I also have this desire to dye my hair, and I want to dye it gray because the main character Mare has gray hair, like gray streaks in her hair. And then also because of Percy Jackson, and like all of my favorite characters just have streaks or tips that are gray, and I really want that.
It's good stuff.
But to give a little context about Red Queen, it's set in a fantasy land in which there are two like subjects of people. You have the Red Bloods, which are kind of traditional humans, and then you have the Silver Bloods, which is the higher class. And those
magic and stuff, right?
They got stuff. They got superpowers. They got stuff. So there is a love triangle in this.
Sorry.
And at some point it does become a love quadrilateral.
Quadrilateral.
Yes, there are 3 potential love interests.
Dang.
But I am hardcore one of them, and I'm not gonna say who it is because I don't want to spoil it for anyone. You know who it is.
But I'll keep my mouth shut.
I really love it. So the main character, Mare, she's a red blood who steals from the wrong person and ends up working in the palace. And while in the palace, she falls into the princess trials, which is all of the royal families kind of coming together and trying to win the hand of the crown prince, Cal. And whoever has the most abilities ends up marrying Cal. She falls in to the training arena and has to pass through like an electric fence, and she doesn't die. So as it turns out, she has powers, but she's a red blood. So the whole time they're trying to figure out like how this all works, and I loved it. My favorite battle scene doesn't happen until book 3, but book 1 is my favorite.
I actually read Red Queen many years ago, probably around the time it came out, like maybe in 2016 or 2017. I could not tell you a single thing that happened in it. I do remember the scene you just mentioned. Other than that, I just kind of forgot everything.
Well, that happens in like chapter 5.
Yeah.
So.
And my memory is very good. I just didn't I liked it well enough, but at the time I wasn't really feeling on like diving into a whole series. But I think actually I would almost be the reverse of you. I feel like I might like the later books better. But I don't know, based on what you have told me about them.
Yeah, I like the development that you get by the end, but I wouldn't just like pick up book 3 and read it for fun. I would reread and reread and reread
would go through
book
the
1.
whole series.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
This is one of the books that I want to feature on the podcast at some point. So
okay. Well, we'll find out later.
Yeah, but it's fine. We'll throw hands or words
virtually. Not to take away from you, but just to keep things moving forward. So my number 6 was Clap When You Land by Elizabeth Acevedo. I actually read all 3 of her like young adult books this year, and I listened to them all on audiobook because she reads her own audiobooks. So I listened to The Poet X, I think it was early summer, and then I listened to With the Fire on High, which is probably I don't know, like I almost like all of her books like the same but for different reasons, but I picked Clap When You Land because I think the cover I went with Clap When You Land on this list because I think the cover is my favorite. Anyway, so like in this book, I know you just read The Poet X, right?
Yes,
and it was very good.
I cried.
Yeah, I think I've cried on every single one of her books that I've read. I don't really understand why. But it's like a good cry too. It's not like melodramatic, sad things cry. It's like
a relatable cry.
Yeah.
Like I feel seen.
Yeah. But basically, it's about these 2 girls living in very different parts of the world, and they share the same father, but they don't know that. And they don't find out about it until he dies in a plane crash. And they sort of start to learn that like their father had this other family in this other country. And
oh my gosh.
Yeah. So it's sort of like this, like it was just very interesting. And like, so, and again, because I didn't have the physical book in front of me, I'm not entirely confident in this. Like The Poet X is like a novel in verse, right?
Yes.
With the Fire on High is prose, I'm pretty sure. At least she read it like prose in the audiobook. Clap When You Land is also in verse. And I think she is so good with language and telling a story. And normally I don't particularly care for novels in verse. Like I'll read them, but it's not really my thing. hers are just so good. Every time I go to the bookstore or to like the used bookstore, I've been trying to see like if they have hers in stock. But I did buy Clap When You Land, from an indie bookstore that I was at a couple weeks ago. Excuse me. So
I love that.
Highly recommend. The cover is gorgeous. The book is beautiful. Like, and it did make me cry. I think I was at my parents' house, like cleaning out my old closet or something, like listening to this book, and I was just like crying. I was like, I hope nobody comes in here because I have a mess right now. Yeah.
I think we've all had those moments.
Uh-huh. Very, very good book. Like, if you have not read anything by Elizabeth Acevedo, highly, highly recommend her. Highly recommend the audiobooks if you can find them.
Yeah. Indeed. I really liked the Poet-X, so I'm looking forward to this year reading more of her books.
Yay.
Are we ready for number 5? And we get to both talk about this one.
We are
so my my number 5 was For the Wolf by Hannah Whitten, which we'd mentioned in Maggie's list earlier. I accidentally 8. Yeah, I accidentally picked this book up the month it was published. And I did not realize that until I was like halfway through the book and Googling the author. And I knew it was her debut novel, but I didn't realize it was literally that month that the book had come out. So I read it while on my anniversary vacation, and I read most of it at Hershey Park. I don't like roller coasters. So I was very pleasantly the bag lady where I just like held everybody's stuff. It was great. I loved it.
You got to sit on a bench and read a book all day. What not to love, right?
I know. So I really loved it. I thought it had a very kind of unique take on Little Red Riding Hood and Beauty and the Beast. And the sibling dynamics in the book were so spot on.
It is peak sibling.
When Maggie was working through it, she mentioned something about the two characters because the main characters are twins. Twin sisters. And I have a younger sister who was in Maggie's class at the same college. And I just said, like, if anything like this happened to my sister, I would tear the world apart. Like, I would burn the world down because she's my sister. Mm-hmm. And I was like, I don't always like this character, but I do always understand this character.
Yes. I think the way that I put it was, to clarify, I have a younger brother, no sisters. So our relationship is perhaps a little bit different.
Yeah.
I think I said about the character that Rachel's talking about, I said, I think I would like to like give her a little slap, but then also a very big hug. Because I understood what she was going through, but I also was like, man, this girl's making some poor choices. Not that it made the book like a poor experience for me. It was just like, it just needs you to pull yourself together a little bit, but also like, here's a hug.
I'm going to have an Edna Mode moment with you and then walk you through this.
Yes.
Because sometimes you just need that little bit of love.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. For the Wolf was very good. The characters were really good. I think, okay, so if I talk about what I said to you, is that going to be like spoilery? Because I feel like it's kind of obvious based on the premise.
No, I don't think it's that spoily.
So like, the whole premise of the book is they send whenever there is a second daughter like born to the royal family, she is for the wolf, which means they send her into these like magical creepy woods, and there's a wolf
the wilder woods.
The wilder woods. I kept saying it wilder woods.
Well, do you remember when I was initially reading it and I was like, I need them to be more creative with the naming here.
Yeah. It was a little on the nose, but anyway, so she's like, so the main character that we follow is Red, which is short for something.
Redaris.
So I think that's it. I think that's how you say it. So she is the second daughter, and she is being sacrificed to the wilder woods or whatever for the wolf and everything. So obviously you're going into this thinking like, well, obviously the wolf of the woods is not going to be like this monster that we all know about, and there's obviously going to be some sort of romance between them. Like, duh. It felt very obvious to me, like, the moment I picked up the book. And I texted Rachel and I said, I'm probably not going to like this aspect of the book, but I'll deal with it. And then I was like, then I think like midway through the book, I was like, I may have to retract that statement.
And just for the record, and I don't think that this is too spoily, and Maggie, if you disagree, we can cut it out of the recording.
Post. We can edit it in post.
Indeed. But he is just such a nerd.
Yep.
Like, all he wants to do with his life is sit in his library.
Mm-hmm.
And he's such like a little soft boy. Like,
well, I don't know if I'd go that far, but like,
what he wants is to be a soft boy.
Yes.
But he doesn't have that option.
Correct.
Anyway, I love him.
Yeah, it was good.
I'm trying to get my sister to read the book now.
I think she would really like it.
And small plug, book 2 is coming out June 2022.
I can't wait that long. That's 6 months away, Rachel.
I know, but like, for a debut novel, first of all, I thought it was wonderful. I loved it. And having the sequel then come out exactly a year later, I think is really nice.
I think the complaints that I would have about it are very minor. Like you said, like the naming was a little like on the nose there, but it also felt like it was meant to be that way in some sense. Like it gave it a sort of fairy tale quality to it. But
yeah.
Anyway, it was
also just as a tangent. In one of my Facebook groups that's like book reading, somebody was asking for a book where the woods were sentient. And I was like, oh, For the Wolf. So not really a spoiler again, but the woods have some sentience to them.
Yes. I quite enjoyed it. I think I read it in like 2 or 3 days.
Yeah.
When did I
so what was
I don't know. It doesn't matter.
I don't know when you started it.
I'm shocked.
What was your book 5?
My book 5 was The Boy Who Steals Houses by C.G. Drews, who also goes, you might know, as Paper Fury on like book blogging and things like that. So she's like done book reviews and book blogs for a while and now has written some of her own books. So I read Boy Who Steals Houses and I cried the whole time.
Love that.
I don't really know how to explain this book in a way that will do it justice. So basically the concept is, I can't even remember any of the characters' names. That's really terrible of me. So it's these 2 brothers and they are homeless basically. And the younger brother has sort of taken on an older brother role because his older brother is autistic, I believe it is, or is on the autism spectrum. And so this younger brother has been trying to like, he's always felt like he needs to be like the one to protect his brother from people who will take advantage of him and things like that. But the title comes from the younger brother. He steals houses, basically. Like he finds out when people aren't going to be home and he just like lives in their house while they're not there. Like he breaks in and just kind of lives there, and things like that. But then he breaks into one house and turns out the house is not vacant. It's actually like being occupied by a family of several children of varying ages. And because there is so much chaos in this house, they're just like, oh, you must be like one of the boys' friends or something like that. Like, here, come have breakfast with us. And he sort of ends up having this connection with this family, but all the while they don't know like that he's basically like a criminal. And he ends up like having this relationship with the one daughter and like, or this friendship and everything. And it's just, it is a very painful book in some ways, but it's like, I don't know how to describe it in a way that doesn't make it sound like terrible.
Yeah.
Like, it hurts, but in a way that doesn't feel like you're just causing pain for the drama.
I got you.
It just, and it ended in the way that it should, but it is not the ending that you expect. But it is the right way to end. I don't know. I really liked it. I really loved the characters. I really wanted to just adopt all of them and take care of them. Uh-oh, I lost you.
That was my fault.
I saw your face moving and I was like, oh no.
We're good.
Okay.
Speaking of adopting children, can I list my number 4?
Yes. And I think we should talk about this book now because it's my number 2, but I think we should talk.
So now, speaking of adopting children, Truly Devious, the entire series, books 1 through 3 by Maureen Johnson. They were published between 2018 and 2020. I read, again, the first one in that spring break, Let's Buy the Books, where I only read the first of series. I actually initially started to listen to it as an audiobook in January, and it's kind of a hard book to listen in audiobook form because it flips back and forth between 2 storylines. One in the 1930s and then one in contemporary time.
Right.
And it gets a little bit confusing because you have a bunch of characters that you kind of have to keep track of. The main character being Stevie Bell, Queen. I love her. Her entire goal is to solve this mystery that takes place at this school where she is attending. And because she solves mysteries. Like, that's what she wants to do.
And this is the mystery from the 1930s. Like, it has gone unsolved for decades. And she comes to the school where it takes place, and she's like, I'm going to be the one to solve it.
And the entire mystery required, like, to get from point A to the very end of point B, like full resolution, you have to read the first 3 books of the series. There's now a 4th book that came out. It's still the same characters, but it is a different mystery, so we didn't include that in our list. I also read that book while I had COVID, so my memory of the book is a little warped. but it's the first 3 books, we both really love them, and I think we love them for some of the same reasons, but then also some very different reasons. So why do you love them?
And I was just going to say real quick, just for those who aren't familiar with the books, the 3 books in the trilogy are Truly Devious, The Vanishing Stare, and The Hand on the Wall.
Correct.
I can't remember if it's in the wall or on the wall, but I'm pretty sure
it's on the wall. And they each have a different color scheme that goes with them. So the first one is blue, the second one is red, and the third one is green.
Yes. And then there's a 4th, like, sort of spin-off book that's called The Box in the Woods that just came out in 2021.
And as another plug, there will be another one.
Yes, and there's going to be another one after it, which is, like, bless. But yeah, I really liked Truly Devious. I actually put it as my number 2 on my list. When I was younger, I really loved mystery books. Like, I read a lot of, like, children's mystery series. And of course, those are all, like, benign. Like, nobody ever really dies in a children's mystery. Not that they can't be good. I'm just saying, like, they're usually not a murder mystery. And it's been a really long time since I read a mystery book that kept me guessing, I think. But it wasn't like, I don't typically care for, like, a thriller type of thing. I might read one if it was, like, really good, but I just don't really care. I'm more about, like, the mystery than, like, the scare, I guess.
Yeah.
And so I feel like a lot of mysteries that are marketed to, like, our age demographic tend to be more of a thriller, and I don't really care for that. So Truly, I just said, it's been so long since I read such a good mystery. I also just felt really endeared to the characters, even if I wanted to smack a couple of them sometimes. And I told Rachel this. My favorite character is Nate, because he comes to this school that they're all at, Ellingham Academy. It's sort of like, I don't know, how would you describe it? Like for geniuses, or
So
highly selective?
In academia, it would be called a magnet school. You have to apply to it, but it only takes a certain amount of students, and it is highly specialized. So it is specialized in working with what we would traditionally label as gifted students.
All of us gifted students who then burned out by the age of 22.
Yes, but we can have hope that these kids will not burn out.
we really do hope. But anyway, so Nate, my favorite character, is at this school, and he becomes really good friends with Stevie. But he's at the school because he published like a fantasy novel, and now
like an 800-page fantasy novel at
like,
15.
First of all, that's the dream. And it became hugely popular, and now he's at the school because he's like such a gifted writer, but he's trying to work on book 2 and he just can't get it done. And the whole, like, throughout all 3 books of this series, he's avoiding his project at all costs. And I just really appreciate that. Like, I mean, obviously he was written by a writer, but like, it's someone who knows the writing struggle.
Yes. And so Nate is not my favorite character, but he is up there in my favorites. And I just love all of his like one-liners.
Yes.
He has the best one-liners.
Sometimes, but like sort of
in a loving way.
Grumpy.
Yeah. He's kind of like Oscar the Grouch.
Yeah.
Where you love him, but he's kind of a butthead.
Mm-hmm. But again, in a way that makes you love him.
Yes. And my favorite character from the whole series is Stevie, because I find her very relatable. She and I have probably very similar unhealthy obsessions with true crime. And I love that for her. Probably my second favorite character, and this is where Maggie and I
this is where our opinion
diverge, is a character named David, and we find out more.
Kind of a butthead.
I would go so far as to say, I'm going to do it again, Maggie,
that I need to cover my ears.
He is an asshole.
I mean, that's true though.
It is very true.
He's not a nice person for like most of the book.
No. Yes, and
most of the books, plural.
He's kind of justified in it.
Yes.
But that's not the point I'm making. He very much reminds me of Holden Caulfield from the book Catcher in the Rye. Oh my gosh.
From the most popular book that you read this year.
I know. I could see the cover, okay? And I could picture the characters. So like I just was having words issues. But I absolutely love him, and I just want to give him a hug because he really needs one. But, and Maggie, these are your words, you liked him more in book 4, which is after this trilogy.
Yes. I would not say that David is my favorite character. I think he has a really good character arc, and I also think that he works really well as a character in the story.
Yes.
I think he works really well as, I think he works really well like in parallel with Stevie. Like I think they balance each other out really well.
For sure.
There was something else I was going to say about him. I don't know. I think I also have to keep reminding myself that I am in my 20s now. I am not a teenager anymore. All of these characters are teenagers, and they're also like in their like second to last or last years of high school.
They're all juniors and seniors.
Yeah. I try to sometimes I try, well, whatever. Anyway, so I have to keep reminding myself, these are people who, like, as one of my former English professors would say, their brains aren't fully developed yet. And so I have to keep reminding myself, like, okay, they're gonna make dumb choices, because I made dumb choices when I was 17 and 18. Like,
I still make dumb
I
choices
still
at
make
26.
dumb choices. They're different dumb choices, but they are still
but they
dumb
are still
choices.
dumb.
And so, like, I think that's one thing I had to keep reminding myself, especially with, sorry, I thought something just flew in front of me, but it was a reflection in my keyboard. I have to remind myself, like, this is a normal way for, like, someone of this age to act, especially in relation to David. Like, everything he does makes sense for who he is. It does not change the fact that there were times when I thought he was being a real jerk.
Oh, yeah.
But
yeah. For sure. And I think
he is a very good character, and I really liked him more in The Box in the Woods, because it felt like he was finally being the person who he was growing into throughout the trilogy.
Yes. And I think it's a lot easier for me to read the book because I am a teacher, and like this is my age that I deal with. So for me, like, he just did stuff and I'm like, okay, yeah, that's normal. Like, okay, whatever. Like,
teenage boy would do.
I definitely have students that are David.
Fair enough.
And
also,
like
no, go ahead.
I'm just saying, like,
I was gonna kind of change the topic, but go ahead.
They are the ones that struggle the most, but then I also see the most change in and the most development into being a better human.
I was also just going to say, I never quite figured out why David is at Ellingham Academy. Like, I know he's there because of things like,
related to his backstory, which are spoily.
Yes, but I also just like never quite figured out, like, what is his, like, because like all of the characters have this like specialty that brings them there. So like Stevie's is her mysteries, Nate is his book. There's another character, is her name Janelle?
Yeah.
Is it Janelle? She's very good at like engineering and like building and creating things. But I never figured out why David's there.
I know why. I've also read these books multiple times at this point. He's a computer programmer.
Oh.
So that's why he can do all the hacking stuff in the end when they do the thing and they have the stuff.
Oh, that makes so much more sense.
Huh. Right, and that's why he like does the thing.
I got you. We can leave.
Okay.
Huh.
Yeah. He like develops video games.
Oh. Huh.
Yeah.
I don't know how.
You're welcome.
That.
I don't know. Well, it wasn't super obvious the first time.
To be fair, we also
read it.
Barely saw him for a while. Like,
yeah, he does go off for a little bit.
He just kind of like. Anyway, we both really liked Truly Devious
so much, and this was another series where I was like, Maggie, you need to read this.
In my defense, this was not the first time I'd been told to read it. Other people recommended it to me. I think. Hold on, now I'm going to look because I don't want to say this wrong. I think one of our mutual college friends has also read this trilogy.
He did. He did.
You know who I'm talking about.
Yes, I do.
If he ever listens to this, he'll know who he is. Hello. I'm trying to see who else read this.
We were talking about Shadow and Bone in a group chat.
Oh, I was going to bring that story up later.
We can. That's not the story I'm going to tell.
Oh, okay.
And I was just like, yeah, I'm currently reading this series. And like, I couldn't fall asleep last night because I just finished book 2, which leads right into book 3. And I was like, and I couldn't sleep because I just wanted to read it. And our friend was like, oh my gosh, it is so good.
I missed that part. I just remember us talking about Shadow and Bone, but we can talk about that story later.
Yeah, we'll talk about that later. Because that is a story worth telling.
Yes. All right. I lost our list because I opened a new tab. Okay, so we're on number 4.
Yes, and your number 4.
I'll just mention my number 4 was These Violent Delights. I do not have much to say about it because I read it in January, and so I hardly remember anything at this point. But I just remember it. I went into it with mixed expectations because I don't typically care for a Shakespeare retelling, especially if it's of Romeo and Juliet. I just think it's kind of overrated. I don't have very strong opinions on Shakespeare, except I don't really like Julius Caesar and I don't really like Romeo and Juliet. But this is like a 1920s, I believe it takes place in Shanghai, like retelling of Romeo and Juliet with like warring gangs and everything. And I just wrote in my notes here, basically, it gave Romeo and Juliet everything it needed, which was more stabbing and some sea monsters.
Love it.
I think it's a sea monster. It might just be a monster. Don't really know. The sequel just came out a couple months ago, Our Violent Ends, but I kind of want to reread These Violent Delights before I read Our Violent Ends, so I'm going to try to do that in the new year.
We can buddy read These Violent Delights because I haven't read it yet.
Oh, yes. I think it is very good. I also think Rachel would very much like it.
Probably.
Yeah. Good. It's good stuff. Since I know that I want to move us along because I know this next one is going to take us a little while. So Rachel, tell me what your number 3 choice was for the year.
So my number 3 is another
she just clumped a bunch of stuff together. Related
it's justified. It's justified. I'm
just saying.
So my number 3 is the original Percy Jackson series, so Percy Jackson and the Olympians, and the Kane Chronicles, which are all Rick Riordan. Mm-hmm. And in my defense, there is a book that ties them together. Yes. So like, I'm not going to feel that bad.
I just kind of refer to it all collectively as the Riordan verse because they're all connected somehow.
Yeah. But I wanted to specify because I have not read Heroes of Olympus yet. I have not read Magnus Chase, and I have not read Trials of Apollo. And I wanted to specify like these are the ones that I have read, and these are the ones that I currently love, and this is number 3.
Poor Rachel has already been spoiled on so many things about the other series because the Percy Jackson fandom can't keep their mouths shut, but it's fine.
I'm also coming very late to the party.
This is very true.
So I am like coming at the end of the party with a plate of cookies, and I'm not even through the door with my cookies yet, and they're already gone.
There's one thing. If you're a Percy Jackson fan, you'll know what I'm about to talk about, but I won't say what it is. There's something that happens in the Heroes of Olympus books that Rachel has heard about, but has not read for herself yet. And she's like, Maggie, does this really happen? And I'm like, yeah. And she's like, how am I supposed to read these books? And I'm like, Rachel, we're going to sit down and we're going to have a little talk here. And it's going to be, at least you get to read them when all of the books are out already. Because when I read them, when I was in like high school, I had to wait a year for each book to come out. I lived for a year in like terror of what would happen in the next book. Okay, so don't come crying to me. I do not have any sympathy.
Okay. Okay. But I have also had to do that for other series, including the Kane Chronicles.
Yes.
And the Kane Chronicles, in some ways, I would say, are even more sad than Percy Jackson.
I would almost agree. I think they are at very similar levels, but in different ways.
Yes. And for me, again, because growing up, I was very into ancient Egypt, I have always very hardcore been a Kane Chronicles fan when like nobody else knew they existed. Yeah. Right? Everybody kind of knows about Percy Jackson, and then you're like, what about the Kane Chronicles? And everybody's like,
the what?
Yeah. And I'm like, I just want one friend. And now I have said one friend.
I am the one friend.
Yes. And we buddy read the Kane Chronicles this year.
I reread them. I read them for the first time around the time when they came out.
I read them as they were coming out.
So we would have been very similar ages, I think. But the reason I read The Red Pyramid the first time, which is the first book in the Kane Chronicles, was because it was, wow, that was a lot of rhyming words. It was like my middle school book club's like book choice of that month. So I got it from the library and I read it. And I really loved it. And then everyone was like, oh yeah, this is the guy who wrote the Percy Jackson books. And this was when Percy Jackson was like really becoming popular. And me being like the preteen hipster that I was like, I don't want to read, I almost said Harry Potter. I don't want to read Percy Jackson. It's so popular, which was also my feelings about Harry Potter, but that's a different story.
We have many Harry Potter feelings.
I had a preteen hipster complex. But I read The Red Pyramid and I read all the other books and really liked them, but I would not read Percy Jackson for the longest time. And then finally I had a friend who really liked Percy Jackson, and she's like, Maggie, please read these books. For the love of God, read these books. And so I did, and now I am obsessed. And then my life was all downhill from that point. But yeah, I actually read the Kane Chronicles before I read Percy Jackson. But I have not read them since then. So this is like the first time in maybe 8 or 9 years that I've read them.
I mean, again, I read them as they were coming out. So this was the first time I'd read them in a decade.
Yeah. Which is hard to believe we've been alive that long sometimes.
Maggie, I've had diabetes for longer than I didn't have diabetes.
That is a thought.
Right?
We're getting old, Rachel.
I know. And just for anyone in our listenership, I have type 1 diabetes. It's, again, been over half my life at this point. Totally fine with it. But, like, it is very much a part of who I am and part of my identity.
It's a thing.
So I talk about it and I don't have issues with that. Yeah. So there we go.
There we go. Go ahead.
I was just going to say that Percy Jackson and the Kane Chronicles are going to be episodes of our podcast in the future.
Yeah. I think we definitely need to do like a deep dive into these books.
Oh, yeah.
Because there is a lot to say about them, both like as works of fiction and also like, I'm going to use a English major word here and I might be using it wrong, like meta textual, like sort of like how these books exist in relation to like the real world, if that makes sense.
I was going to call it like the pop culture connection.
Yeah, that's a better way to put it.
Yeah.
I don't know. I just got inhabited by the soul of a dead English professor somewhere for a moment. But yeah, I have to say I was so impressed. Not that I expected anything different by the Kane Chronicles when I reread them. Just there is so much going on there that I did not pick up on as a younger reader. And it's just there is just a lot of really good stuff in there and I really appreciated it.
Yeah, agreed.
But yeah, do you want to say anything else about the books?
I think that just the one last thing I want to say is that when we do our episodes on this, Maggie will be the expert in Percy Jackson and I will be the expert in Kane Chronicles. I think that's fair to say.
I think that's very fair. And again, expert for me on Percy Jackson is a little bit of a stretch, but I might consult with some outside sources.
Okay, but isn't that part of being an expert, is knowing where to find the appropriate resources?
You know what? I like the way you think, Rachel.
I got you.
So my number 3 is The Ones We're Meant to Find by Joan. I think that's how you say her name. Which I got in a book box. I would probably not have picked it up otherwise, but I got in like a book subscription box. And I was like, this seems pretty interesting. So I picked it up and I was just like floored. I couldn't put it down. Like it just grabbed me and did not let go. It was it's definitely like a dystopian sort of science fiction-y type vibe. Basically the Earth is dealing with a climate disaster where it is essentially becoming, yeah, I know, right? Rachel's making a face of like, that doesn't sound familiar at all. But the Earth has experienced like a climate disaster, and I don't even really know how to explain it. We're switching back and forth in perspective between two sisters, where one has sort of found herself on this remote island and she doesn't remember how she got there, but she knows she needs to go back and find her sister. Meanwhile, the other sister is in like, I think they're sort of like floating cities almost, like built on the water, because the earth is mostly water at this point. A lot of the earth has flooded. I can't really remember, but like sort of her dealing with like, she thinks her sister is dead. She believes that her sister is dead. And so it was just so good. And things kept unfolding, and it reminded me a lot of, and I mean this in the best way possible, because like in like the 2010s, early 2010s, I guess, there were so many dystopian YA fiction, and not all of it was good. This book reminded me of the best of them in like the best way possible. It just had the right vibe, it had the right characters, the right kind of setting and conflict that I think made a lot of the best of the YA dystopian trend work. But it also felt new and unique.
I love that.
But yes, very good book. Highly recommend. I guess we'll move on to number 2, because I know we both have a lot to say about Rachel's number 2, which was
What We Devour by Lindsay Miller. Holy Toledo.
I'll let you take away on this one, and I might pipe in with a couple of comments here.
So I listened to this book as an audiobook around the start of the school year. So I read it in September, and I stayed up past my bedtime, which for those of you who don't know me, I'm fairly strict about my bedtime. Like,
she's very good.
I am in bed at a certain time. And I think I stayed up like an hour and a half, 2 hours later than normal, just because I loved this book so much and I wanted to finish, and I didn't get to finish it. So I was like sitting at my sewing machine because I was sewing, just like trying to finish and stay awake because I loved it so much. Essentially, what it boils down to is there is this fantasy world in which certain people are born with abilities, and in order to use those abilities, they have to give up something else. So they essentially write these contracts of like, you do this for me, and their powers are, the way that the main character describes her powers is that they are a sentient being within her, and she makes these deals with them, whereas other people physically write out contracts and say, this happens, you get this from me, or you get this from this thing. And the main character doesn't actually write out her contracts, and she's untraceable. She is not controlled by another body. Mm-hmm. And
most of the people with these powers in the world have some kind of, I think they call it, they're like bound.
Yeah, to, like, they're bound to the, yeah.
In some manner,
and she is unbound.
Right.
And she kind of gets discovered by this prince who is going to use her unboundedness to do research on a door, as one does, on a door that has been containing these quote unquote evil creatures.
Mm-hmm. The door is, do you mind if I pick up on here a little bit?
No, please go. Yeah.
So this is a bit of an oversimplification, but this door is basically holding back these evil creatures, quote unquote. But the thing is that in order for the door to stay in place, they have to keep making sacrifices to it, and the sacrifices keep getting more and more costly. And by sacrifices, I mean it's kind of like human sacrifice, so whatever.
It is not kind of. It is human sacrifice.
It is human sacrifice, which, you know, this is not a storybook for your children.
No. And this is not a book you should read if you want
people to take you seriously.
Joy and happiness. Yeah.
That too. The world feels very post-apocalyptic, even though the apocalypse hasn't really happened yet. It just feels very apocalyptic.
Well, in some ways it has, right? Yeah, because they being the people in the history of this realm had captured the bad guys and put them behind the door. And the door is semi-sentient as well.
the prince is trying to find a way to destroy the door entirely without opening this, without reconnecting the worlds, blah, blah, blah. And that's why he takes the main character and he's like, hey, you might have some key that we can't get to because you're the one who isn't bound.
And it very much has a dark academia feel to it.
Mhm.
Like, we probably sound a little psychotic explaining this book.
Oh, only a little?
Okay, I was trying to be nice. And there was something about this book that I very much felt like I had like a Doctor Who moment where like the doctor grabbed my hand and said run, and I ran with it. And I felt like it gripped me by my heart, and I just loved it so much. And I cried. There were moments where I was like, oh my gosh, and then just tears. And as soon as I finished, I said, Maggie, I need you to read this book. You are either going to love it or you are going to hate it, but I'm going to be selfish and say, I need you to read it.
It was very selfish, but I was better for it.
It was so good.
I think what really got me, I was very intrigued by the magic and stuff. It didn't always make sense to me, but I was just kind of like, we'll see how it goes.
Mm-hmm.
I was much more intrigued by the characters and their relationships with each other, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And the book almost made me cry a couple of times, but I think it was different reasons. I was just, I'm trying to think of how to explain it, because we talked about this. So
yeah.
Again,
I did cry at the scene that I think you're talking about.
Mm-hmm. I think there is really good. So the main character ends up having a sort of romantic relationship. I'm not really sure how you would describe it with the one like male main character. It's very strange. I don't want to say it's very strange. It's just, it's hard to put a label on what.
It's not a traditional dynamic.
Yeah. But what I really appreciated about it was that, and you can correct me if what I'm saying is not quite accurate. The best way I can describe it is it felt, where did my notes go? It felt sort of like it went beyond like an are you okay with this to more of a this is a relationship of mutual respect and meeting each other's needs in a way where both people are satisfied, I guess. I don't know. It sounds like a very business way to put like a human relationship, but I feel like in a lot of the books that I read, you kind of just stop at like, well, as long as everyone's okay with this, we're good, without really, it felt a lot more nuanced than most fiction I've read.
There were not expectations for something to happen.
Yes.
And it was very refreshing to see this loving dynamic in a relationship where, or in a situation where a certain type of love was expected.
Yes. Yes, I very much agree. That is
I loved this book. Oh, I just can't. I can't. We're good.
It was also just very gay and very good.
And, you know, it was so good. I cried so much. I literally finished the book in my car and I had to stop. I was sitting in a parking lot just sobbing at the end.
At first, I was like, why were you reading in the car? And then I remembered you said audiobook.
I did listen to this as an audiobook. I do now own the physical book and I do want to reread it and like go through and annotate it because I like to annotate on rereads. But yeah, this is, there is a reason it is in spot 2.
I didn't know you could get it as a real, like
as a physical book.
I only found it as an ebook.
Which
is fine.
I found it at Barnes and Noble on an end cap, and it was the only copy there. Yeah.
Lucky find.
Indeed. And then your number 2, Maggie?
Oh, my number 2 is Truly Devious, but we've already talked at length about Truly Devious, so I will just say that. We can move right along. All right, so we've been through the first, can't do math, 9 from our top 10. But before we go to our number 1 picks, I think we should do our honorable mentions. So Rachel, off the recording, graciously recommended that I go first.
Just because there's a story about one of my honorable mentions that we're going to talk about.
So my honorable mentions were The Tea Dragon Society by Kay O'Neill. Talked about that already. Sky Hunter and Steel Striker by Marie Lu, which really almost made it into the top 10, but the Legends trilogy will always have my heart, and it's going to be hard to top that. Sorry, Marie. I say that like we're BFFs. And my other honorable mentions, Romeo and or Juliet by Ryan North, which weirdly enough, why did I read 2 Romeo and Juliet retellings this year? Don't know.
For someone who doesn't like Romeo and Juliet.
Okay, but here's the thing. This one was called a choosable path adventure. So basically, if you read choose your own adventure books when you were a kid, that's what this is, except it's Romeo and Juliet. And it's about as thick as a phone book. Which, wow, you millennials know what phone books are?
Do you own this one?
I do not.
Okay. So I was like, I don't think I've seen that on your bookshelf.
It's actually not that thick, but it is a thick choose your own adventure book. And my favorite ending was the one where, spoilers, Juliet becomes a pirate and lives out her days on the seas, which is, again, my favorite ending.
Oh no, Maggie, please allow me time to contain my surprise.
I'm sorry. I also picked as honorable mentions Now Entering Adamsville by Francesca Zappia.
Yeah, which was
a recommendation from Rachel. But again,
you'd already read her other books.
Yes,
or at least one of them.
I had read Eliza and Her Monsters, which by the same author, and really liked it. And I've been planning to read Now Entering Adamsville, except Rachel found it at the used bookstore first. And so she was like, I'll let you borrow my copy and then you can give it back to me. And I was like, okay. And then I found my own copy, so it's fine now.
But in my defense, I wanted to buy the book because I have a student who is Ace. And the main character in Now Entering Adamsville is Ace as well.
Right.
So I wanted to be able to be like, hey, this is a book where you can see yourself represented.
Right. Yeah, and just for clarification's sake, by ace, Rachel means asexual.
Yes.
On the asexual spectrum. And that is very true. So the main character in Now Entering Adamsville is asexual. And it's good. And
Thank you for the clarification.
Yes. Sorry. I just know that like sometimes not everybody knows.
Yeah.
All the abbreviations and things. My last honorable mention was The Scorpio Races by Maggie Stiefvater, which I listened to on audiobook. Cannibal Horses, very cool. Good stuff. I will not clarify. Rachel, what were your honorable mentions?
I'm going to go in reverse order from how I wrote them down because we want to talk about that number one.
Okay.
So I read the
Mine
Bean
were
Trees
not in any particular order.
Mine aren't either. I'm just going backwards from how we listed them because the one we want to tell the story about is the top one on my list.
Gotcha.
So The Bean Trees was an honorable mention for me. It was a book published in the 80s, but I had to read it for work this year, and I actually really loved it. I was surprised. I don't enjoy teaching it, but I very much enjoy the book. So, yeah. Stalking Jack the Ripper series by Carrie Montescallo. I have a lot of mixed feelings about her writing style. I also figured out who the murderer was on page 40. I literally texted Maggie and was like, I know who did it. But I love the relationship dynamics and I love the banter. So that's why I continue reading, and it made it into my honorable mentions. The A Touch of Darkness series by Scarlett St. Clair. It's a retelling of Hades and Persephone. It is an 18+ book. So just please keep that in mind, and also look up trigger warnings for that book, especially. A Good Girl's Guide to Murder by Holly Jackson. I listened to the first one in January. I listened to the second one in March, and then the third one just came out, and I'm on the waiting list to listen to it from my library. I do recommend those as audiobooks because she is recording a podcast in the book. So it just to provide some context. But my kind of top listed one was the Shadow and Bone series by Leigh Bardugo, which I then made my sister read. So I bought the first one on that spring break. I'm just going to get the first books. So I got the first one and was like, yeah, I'm not going to need the rest of them yet. Like, I have time. I did not, in fact, have time. But I made my sister read them, and then she was ready for Siege and Storm, but I hadn't read it yet. So I read the book in less than 24 hours while still working full time. Maggie, would you like to share a story?
I'm trying to find the conversation that was here. Hold on. I just don't want to quote any of us out of turn.
Incorrectly. Yeah.
Incorrectly, yes.
I can definitely tell you it was about the TV show.
Yes, it was. Okay. Yeah, so this was like spring of this year at some point. It was before the Shadow and Bone TV show came out.
But so like at max a month before it came out.
Yeah. So we have like a couple of us who were like in some of the same classes in college. There's like a group chat of like 4 of us, and Rachel just kind of like casually mentioned like, I just finished a book and I don't really know what to do with myself. And we were all like, oh, like pat sympathy on Rachel. But then she mentions, she says, it was a good book too. I'm quoting directly because I found the message. She says, it was a good book too. The series is getting turned into a Netflix show. And then I saw this and I was like, And then she says, comes out in 2 weeks, and Ben Barnes, aka Prince Caspian, in it, who turns 40 this year. Sorry for the large volume change there. For anyone who's listening with earbuds.
Rip headphone
and
users.
Then people were talking about like, oh, like how he's that old, and I said in all caps, Rachel, are you talking about Shadow and Bone? Because I saw like Netflix series and I saw Ben Barnes, and I was like, this is too many coincidences. Are you okay there? You made a face.
I whacked my microphone again. Well, I didn't mean to.
Anyway, then Rachel says, I am talking about Shadow and Bone, and then we just kind of took over the group chat for a second there, and then we just started talking about it like in our own private chat because we realized our friends were getting annoyed.
Indeed. And I feel the need to say, like, we were friends before that, but after that we started our literally talking every day.
Yes. Yeah, like I hadn't really talked to Rachel. These are things that happen when you're an adult. Like you just kind of like, you have friends but you don't necessarily talk to them all the time. And so like Rachel was kind of like one of those friends, and then we started talking about Shadow and Bone, and then like it was all downhill from there in a good way.
Yes. And now we alternate every other month who goes to visit who. We have both, like, we share our writing with each other all the time, and it's just delightful.
So thank you, Leigh Bardugo, for writing Shadow and Bone. Even if I didn't really care for the book, I'm glad that it got me reconnected with one of my friends.
Indeed.
That tea is still too hot to drink.
It is time for you to take your tea bag out.
I did take the tea bag out right before we told the story. I realized it was
perfect.
We were taking a little long. So if you saw me like duck down here, it's because I was taking the tea bag out and throwing it in the trash.
But yeah, those are our honorable mentions. Gotta love them.
Gotta love them. Well,
are we ready for number 1?
I feel like I need to. Our number 1 picks kind of go together, even though they're not the same book, because they're all by the same author.
They are.
But I'm gonna let Rachel go first, and then I'll go after.
Can I tell my story about the books first and then talk, like, say what the books are?
Yeah.
So this was May. My sister, who is the same graduating class as Maggie,
so she's my age,
was going up for graduation with my parents because their graduation was delayed a year because of COVID.
Shocking.
So I was at my parents' house watching my brothers, and I was like, okay, I'm gonna bring these books with me because I'm babysitting my brothers who are both in high school. And I started reading the first book, and by the next day I had finished it and literally drove home. I live 5 minutes away from my parents. Drove home, picked up the second book, drove back to my parents' house, and continued reading. So my top book is a duology titled The Merciful Crow, is the first book, and the second book is The Faithless Hawk by Margaret Owen. And as soon as I finished reading them, I told Maggie that she needed to read them.
Mm-hmm. And The Merciful Crow had been on my TBR list already, but I had not read it yet, mostly because I saw the cover and I read the blurb and I was like, it's another bird book. Let's read it, because apparently that's my thing now. But yes, I did also love them. And we should talk more about them in a second here, but I also just want to throw out there. So my number one pick of the year is Little Thieves by Margaret Owen, which is her latest book, not connected to The Merciful Crow, still very good, but that just ended up being my favorite pick. But let's talk about The Merciful Crow and The Faithless Hawk.
Actually, I'm going to jump back to Little Thieves. I haven't finished it yet. I have started it. I haven't finished it yet. I have had a little bit going on in my life, Maggie.
I know,
okay?
I haven't had anyone to talk about Little Thieves with yet, and I've been wanting to talk about it so bad, but I also don't want to spoil it for Rachel, so I've been like holding back.
So in reality, I have 3 books I need to finish before 2022. My J book, my Z book, and then Little Thieves.
Mm-hmm.
But now we can talk about The Merciful Crow and The Faithless Hawk.
The Merciful Crow.
Oh my gosh. I found them on accident when I think I was just scrolling through my library recommendations and it was like The Merciful Crow. And I was like, oh, okay, let's check this book out. So I checked out the book. I got The Merciful Crow and The Faithless Hawk. And I held off on reading them for the entire loan period and then renewed them and thought about returning them. I know.
How could you?
I know. But I was like,
tragedies that almost happened.
I know. I was like, I might as well read it. And I read it and I was kind of bored for the first third of the book. It's broken up into 3 parts, The Merciful Crow. Mm-hmm. I was like, okay, this is kind of cool. Like, we've got this traveling band of crows. They're people, but they are in a crow caste. So the society is broken up into 12 different castes that are all named after birds.
Yes, it's 12 because there's one for each month of the year. Right?
I did not make that connection, but I'm pretty sure that is explicitly said. So yes.
Do you want me to go get my copy off the shelf and I can double check?
You can, but I think it's accurate. I think it's Phoenix, Swan.
I'm gonna go get it.
Phoenix, Swan, Hawk, Vulture. These are so not in order. Mm-hmm. Seagull, Crow, Owl. I'm missing 5.
I wasn't really paying attention to what you already said.
That's fine. Do you want to do them in order?
So it's Phoenix, Peacock, Swan, Dove, Hawk, Crane, Owl, Vulture, Gull, Pigeon, Sparrow, and then Crow. So that is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Yeah, there's 12.
And
go ahead.
Well, no, you're continuing with the caste system. So
I was just going to say each caste has its own birthright or power that is associated with them. But again, just
except for the crows.
Right. Which is why they're looked down upon in society, yada, yada, yada.
As Maggie was saying, or as I think she was saying, they are not actually the birds.
Yes,
they are
human beings.
Yes. And their powers are somehow related to whatever bird it is. So like the gulls can manipulate wind. Peacocks are
it says
visual
grammar,
thing.
But it has to do with visuals and illusions and things.
Phoenixes can control fire. Like they're all related in some way.
Yes.
And our main character, Phi, is a crow, and there is a plague in this realm. And the crow's job is to take care of the plague victims, be it delivering a merciful ending in which they kill the plague infected, or just taking away the plague body.
Right. And
the crows cannot get the plague.
Right. I was just going to say that they are immune, which is why they are given this task.
So,
and also because everybody hates them.
Indeed. For the first time in 500 years, the palace has a plague victim, and it actually has 2. So Phi's band of crows, whose crow chief is her adopted dad. His name is Pa. Well, we call him Pa.
Yeah.
And he takes too long to take care of the bodies in the beginning.
Let me just read the first sentence of the book to you, since I have it in front of me.
Yes.
Chapter 1, The Empty Throne. Pa was taking too long to cut the boys' throats. That's how we start this book.
It is so good.
It is so good.
And the relationship, all the relationship dynamics, not even just the romantic ones, I found to be very realistic. I found to be accurate in how they portrayed different things, be it love or betrayal or pain or whatever is happening. It felt very real.
Yes. And I don't think, I'm just looking at the blurb on the back of the book. So we come to find out that these 2 plague victims have actually faked their deaths in order to get out of the palace, and it turns out it's the crown prince and his bodyguard.
And they are cousins. We know that.
We do.
They're cousins.
Okay. They are cousins.
We do know that. That's not a spoiler.
Okay. I thought so, but I couldn't remember.
Mm-mm.
So anyway, they faked their deaths, and that's why it's taking so long to kill them, because they're not actually dead. So the crows smuggle the boys out of the palace.
And the crown prince needs to get away.
Yeah. They basically cut a deal with them. I think that they will get the prince, who is Casimir.
Yep.
And his bodyguard, Tavin. They will get them to safety as long as they promise when Casimir is on the throne, he will enact protections for the crow caste, because they've been so mistreated by the people of the country for so long. So now
literally hunted.
Yes. And so now the quest is for this band of crows to get these boys to safety.
Yep.
To their allies in another part of the country.
I love this duology so much, and my favorite part comes from the second book, and I'm just going to poorly recite one line. I'm not going to tell you who says it. I'm not going to tell you any context. I will tell you it is a male character, and he is crying into a blanket, and he thinks, how long can I continue to cry into this blanket before it stops smelling like her?
It tugs at the heartstrings.
I have so many feelings about these.
I know you do. Rachel really likes Tavin. I feel like we should make that obvious.
I mean, I like all of them.
I know you like all of them, but I know Tavin's your favorite.
Pansexual with a sword.
Which is accurate. But again,
to provide context,
I should link it in the show notes. Margaret Owen did a 1 minute video of explaining the Merciful Crow with stock photos, I think it was.
Yeah.
And,
royalty free images.
Yeah, it was very good. But that's one of the things that she says in it about
that is
Tavin.
A direct quote from Margaret Owen.
I'm gonna make a note here. Find the mark. It's very worth watching. If you would like a reason, if you need more of a reason to read The Merciful Crow, this is a very good. This will convince you without fail. Find the Margaret Owen video.
And Margaret Owen is just a hilarious human being in general. Like, she's one of 4 people I have that I get notifications when they post on Twitter and Instagram. Like, I don't care about anything else. She is so funny.
And also, she tweeted once, this is a slight tangent, she tweeted once about playing Fire Emblem Three Houses, which is one of my favorite games from the last like year or so. And I was just like, okay, we're chill now. Like, so she didn't pick my favorite house, which is fine.
I'm so sorry.
It's okay.
She has a cat named Poe. Delightful.
It's just good stuff.
I love her.
There is also a cat in the Merciful Crow.
There is. His name is Vomit.
Barf.
I knew it was somewhere in there.
You were very close.
I knew it was somewhere in there. And cats actually play a prominent role. Like, they're a recurring motif throughout the books.
Yes, there are lots of cats, and all of them are good, and nothing bad ever happens to them.
Ish.
Nothing bad ever happens to them, Rachel.
Ish.
There is a part where you think something bad may have happened, but nothing bad happens.
Ish.
Okay, fine. We can discuss this at a later time.
The queen literally wears a tiger pelt.
Okay, that's different. Slightly different.
Okay, I can agree with that.
On-page violence, Rachel.
Okay, on-page violence, no, there's not really that much. In regards to cats.
There's a lot of other violence.
Indeed. But this will be one of the duologies that we do a deep dive into. And that episode or series of episodes might even feature my sister, because after I forced Maggie to read these books, I forced my sister to read them. And that's when she had COVID.
Good. I mean, what is
we laugh so we don't cry.
Ain't that the truth? I was gonna say something else about the Merciful Crow, and I don't remember.
I'm so sorry.
I was just gonna say, like, again, I feel like I have not seen very much hype for these books, even though like they're being published by like a major young adult literature publisher that has also published like Shadow and Bone and like almost all of the Grishaverse books and like a lot of really popular things. But for some reason, the Merciful Crow doesn't get as much traction, which blame whatever. But point being, if you like sort of, I don't want to necessarily call it a dark fantasy because it's not really dark, but it is sort of like,
it's like a gray fantasy.
Yeah. And you like cats and you like found family, because the Crow bands are very much like a found family trope. And yeah,
and in some ways our main group of people is a found family.
Yes, I would also agree with that. I think the romantic aspect of the book is very good. Like, it is, the main romantic aspect of the book is like peak, very, very good. It will make you cry, but like it all turns out okay mostly.
And I just want to say, this isn't necessarily about the books, but about my obsession with them. For my birthday, Maggie gave me a special edition version of The Merciful Crow.
That had like special cover art on the dust jacket, right? Or on the inside
yep,
of the dust jacket.
On the inside, and is signed by Margaret Owen. So I like, there are very few books where I feel the need to have them signed by the author, or the desire to have them signed by the author. And this is one of them. And the fact that Maggie recognized that, I think, highlights our relationship, but also shows how important these books are to me.
Yes.
Thank you.
Please. Oh, you're welcome. You deserve it. Please read The Merciful Crow.
They are so good.
That's our plug. Yeah, I hope you don't mind that I'm just gonna move right along here.
Not at all.
So my top 10, my top one, number one, there we go. My number one book of the year, I already said, was Little Thieves, also by Margaret Owen. So I won't go into as much detail because Rachel hasn't read it yet, and I'm really trying not to spoil it for her. It's been really, really hard. I think I mentioned already, just started listening to it again on audiobook because the first time I read it, I was like, oh, this is a comfort book, isn't it? And it is. It is becoming a comfort book. There we go. But anyway, so Little Thieves is sort of a loose retelling of the Goose Girl fairy tale or myth, which I was not familiar with. You do not have to be familiar with it. In fact, it's probably better if you're not, because I think the connections are loose at best, which is really what the best retellings are, I think. But basically, the main character, Vanya, is how do we put this? She's a chaos gremlin. We find that, so she is I guess they call her goddaughter or adopted daughter of the gods of, go ahead.
Death and fortune.
Death and fortune.
She describes them as her godmothers.
As her godmothers, okay. I should know this because I was just listening to it last night, but I couldn't remember.
And you're the one who's finished the book.
I know. I'm sorry. I could not remember. So, and she sort of has, through various things, conned her way into the position of a princess, essentially. But she is trying to escape the country that she's living in. She's trying to escape her godmothers for various reasons, this, that, and the other thing. But she needs to get the money to do that. So she has been conning other wealthy noble families in this country and stealing from them and selling their expensive jewelry and things like that. Until another god catches her and basically curses her, that says, if you don't make up for what you've stolen, in I think it's 2 weeks, you are going to turn into what you've wanted the most, which is basically she'll turn into rubies and pearls. So now, and meanwhile, the princess that she's posing as is supposed to be married to this guy who's kind of a jerk. Actually, he's not even kind of a jerk. He is a jerk. He's the worst.
Just the worst.
He finds out that she's supposed to be married to him in 2 weeks or thereabouts. And so she's got some time crunch. Meanwhile, an official from the government, I guess, I wasn't quite sure how that works, so I'm hoping I understand better this time, has come to their area to investigate this string of thefts. And so she's trying to outsmart him, get out of the country, all kinds of good stuff. I loved every minute of it. I got it in the mail and I was like, I really want to read it because I pre-ordered it. I really wanted to read it so bad, but I told myself, you're going to wait until you have time to read it. So I saved it until I had a few days off around Thanksgiving in November, excuse me. And I devoured it in a couple days. It was so good. So good. So I picked Little Thieves over The Merciful Crow and The Faithless Hawk, even though I liked them all. Little Thieves just felt so good. I can't really explain it without going into much more detail. But it was a very Maggie book, and so it takes my number one spot for the year. And it is also getting, sorry, I'm just going to keep talking. It is also getting, Little Thieves is a standalone.
It was supposed to be a standalone.
Well, it works as a standalone. The plot is wrapped up within one book. But Margaret Owen is writing 2 more books with the same characters that are sort of their own related story. The first one we know is called Painted Devils, I think
so.
We don't know about the second one yet, but also very excited for those because I love the chaotic gremlin Goose Girl.
I am so glad that I accidentally found The Merciful Crow and The Faithless Hawk and then made you read them, and that we both fell in love with Margaret Owen as an author.
We've talked about this before, personally, it seems clear to me, especially from what you can see on social media, which again we know doesn't show the whole picture of who a person is, but whatever. That there's sort of like different generations of young adult writers. Like there's sort of the people who were popular and still are popular, but like were mostly popular when we were teenagers, and then people who were sort of popular when we were in college, and then there seems to be this newer quote unquote generation of writers who specifically write for young adult, who are younger in general, but like are also just newer and have debuted more recently. And I've just been really impressed with this most recent quote unquote generation of young adult writers, like which I would include Margaret Owen in, even though I know The Merciful Crow is from a couple years ago. I think I would 2019 still consider her, which was like 3 years ago, wasn't 2 years ago? Almost 3 years ago.
Technically 2 years ago. But like, so when I read the Faithless Hawk, which is the second one, it was less than a year old.
Okay, that's right, because it wasn't out in paperback yet.
Right.
Yeah.
They're so good.
But yeah, what I was trying to say was just like, I think my encouragement to people listening to this, if I'm assuming you're a reader, if you're listening to us talk about books for hours on end,
or you're somehow related to us, in which case we love you.
Yes, we do love you. Thank you for being supportive. I think I would say that as the new year comes, maybe make it a resolution to try a newer author that you've not heard of. Because I think a lot of times, and I'm sure we will talk about this more next time when we talk about the Goodreads Choice Awards, but I think a lot of times we tend to stick with the authors that we are most familiar with, which isn't a bad thing. But I also think that sometimes that can prevent us from trying books by newer authors and giving them a chance and finding something that we never would have expected to love.
Yes.
Because like I had heard of The Merciful Crow. I don't really remember how, but it wasn't really at the top of my like, I want to read this soon list. It was just kind of like, if I see it, I'll read it. But
and then I came in and was like, Maggie, you need to read this right now.
I don't think I would have read it this year if Rachel hadn't pushed it on me. In a loving way.
Yes. Margaret Owen recently in a tweet said, this is the only type of bullying I condone, and that is making your friends read certain books.
Which is what I've been trying to do with Rachel to get her to read Little Thieves.
I am working on it.
I just like to give her a hard time. Yeah. Well, I think we've said all we've wanted to say about all the books.
I think so too. Yeah.
So if you made it this far into the podcast, thank you. And again, if you're related to us, we love you.
And even if you aren't related to us, we care about you deeply.
I guess as we wrap up, I will just say, so if you found this podcast somehow, you already know how to find it. But if you want to connect with us, we are on Twitter as Book Expert Pod. Because Twitter had a character limit for how many characters could be in a username. And we are also Book Expert Pod on Instagram. So you can find us there, or if you're old school and you want to send us an email, you can send us an email at notthebookexpert@gmail.com. I don't expect to see an email, but hey, if you do, one of us will probably write back if we remember to, which, you know, sometimes happens.
And who knows, maybe you'll end up with both of us.
Maybe you'll end up with both of us. We'll probably both reply separately and then realize, hey, Rachel, did you send that email? Well, we both sent an email and it's fine.
Do you have any last minute thoughts, Maggie?
No, I think I've covered about everything I wanted to say. So
I think so too.
Next time we'll talk about the Goodreads Choice Awards from 2021. And we have a lot of thoughts and feelings about them. And I might even get angry at some point. So if you like to see me get angry about things that don't really matter in the large scheme of things, come back next time.
And even if you don't want to see that, if you want to see me calmly want to throw hands with several people, then please come back as well.
All right. I think we're done here.
Yeah. Bye.
Bye.